first attempt in organizing this kind of an editorial talk series. We wanted to continue this in the days to come, especially in July and August. One of the reasons why we are organizing this series is that many young research scholars have basically talked to us and have expressed their interest in learning from the editors, because they are all struggling with publishing their papers in very well internationally recognized journals. So we thought maybe it is better that if we get an exposure to the kind of editors of these international journals, so who will basically talk to us about some of the issues, some of what type of articles which they would like to see being published, what type of research articles these journals are preferring. So we thought maybe it is better to have an interaction directly with the editors. So I would like to thank all the co-organizers, for especially Dr. Seduraman Shivakumar and my colleague Dr. Sharavanan in jointly organizing this meeting. And I'm now leaving it to Dr. Seduraman to welcome the editor as well as introducing the series. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning to all. With the brief introduction, I am just continuing my role here. And let me introduce our team, who are the host as well as the partners. Dr. Sheila Emmanuel, HOD, Extension and Social Sciences from ICAR CTCRI, and as well as Dr. Saravanan Raj. He is a director in National Institute of Agricultural Extension Management located at Hyderabad. Now I will introduce Dr. Sheila Emmanuel to say a few words. Madam?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
madam.
Yeah, very good morning to all of you. So, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Val Snow, Chief Editor, Agriculture Extension System, for giving us this opportunity to listen to her. And as rightly stated by Dr. Rashid Sulaiman, many of the papers when we are publishing, we are just going through the author guidelines. There is no problem in that, but still now this is a very good opportunity for us to interact with the editor directly, and what are the doubts what we are getting out of this can be clarified because of this meeting. So I'm not taking much time. I once again welcome all of you to attend this meeting, and let us reap all the benefit through this test series. Thank you, one and all.
Yeah. So now I request Dr. Saravanan Raj, before he starts, I will give a brief few words about his organization. He is a director of National Institute of Agricultural Extension Management, which is shortly called as MANAGE, which is the premier agency for extension research, extension management in all over India. It's like a social science component of agricultural sciences. Now I will request Dr. Saravanan Raj to say a few words.
Yeah, very good morning to all of you. Dr. Rashid Sulaiman and Madam Dr. Sheila Emmanuel and Dr. Seduraman Shivakumar and Dr. Wales, today's speaker of the webinar. And very good morning to all of you and all the participants of this webinar. It is always a delight to partner with Agriculture Extension South Asia. There is a platform for improving agriculture extension. And with that, we are last 2 years, we are doing something related to good practices in agriculture extension. And Dr. Seduraman is very much with the CTCRI and the help of the HOD of the department. And we are collaborating with the CTCRI and the ASA for taking the good practices in agriculture extension research across the country last 2 years. At the series of that initiative, this may be the next edition, new initiative. It may be a very timely one. I appreciate especially Dr. Sheila Emmanuel for giving opportunity and also taking us again partner for this new initiative. And also I appreciate and I thank for the today's speaker, and we hope to be continuing a large number of editors. It will be helpful for all the stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we are pleased to welcome Dr. Val Snow. He is a very distinguished and special guest from New Zealand. Dr. Val Snow is a system modeler at AG Research. It's one of the New Zealand's largest Crown Research, which is a corporate research institute, and which is contributing extensively in the area of both New Zealand as well as the international research. And Dr. Snow is from the background of soil physics and in agricultural background. And Dr. Val Snow studied in the agricultural science before earning a PhD in soil physics at the Massey University of New Zealand. After her studies, she worked at the Michigan State University in the United States, CSIRO in Australia before joining the AG Research. Her research focuses on the development and use of the simulation models to support the technological innovation in pastoral agricultural systems and assessment of the impacts and of the land use. And application areas of her research includes land use policy, future farming systems, greenhouse gas mitigation, and climate change adaptation. Dr. Snow has extensively published in the high impact agricultural and other journals, and her works are cited by more than over 5,800 times by the papers published in the peer-reviewed journals. In her addition to her research, Dr. Snow is currently serving as a chief editor-in-chief of the Elsevier journal, Agricultural Systems. And today she will be sharing with us about the aspects related to the editorial processes for publishing in the journal, Elsevier Journal, Agricultural Systems. And with that, I ask Dr. Snow to start the session, and I request all the participants to shift their focus to the Dr. Snow session. Dr. Snow, please.
Thank you very much. It's quite an honour to be invited to speak to you all, and I'm very pleased to be able to tell you more about the journal and the processes, and hopefully give you some tips about what you can do to help get your papers more likely to be accepted. So with that, I'll just do a sound check first. Can you hear me well?
Yes, yes.
It's great. Right, I'll just start the presentation, and there we go. So that's now showing the presentation?
Yes, we are getting.
Yes, great. Thank you. So this is a bit of an outline of the talk today. So a bit about the journal, and then about what desk reject decisions are, and then how to avoid one. And then hopefully a few bits and pieces to help you after you've got through the desk reject, you've avoided one, and then you're into the review process. Before yesterday, I was supplied with a list of written questions, so I've got a series of slides after the main presentation with replies to those questions. But I understand there may be more that come up during the presentation today, and they'll be handled afterwards. So first, I am just one of 5 editors for the journal. We have quite a large number of submissions, around about 1,400 a year. So we need quite a good team to deal with them. We have Guillaume Martin from France, Emma Stevens from Canada, Jagadish Timsena from Australia, Mark Van Wyck from Ecuador, and I'm the editor-in-chief from New Zealand. It's really good having a wide geographic spread of the editors, but we've also got quite a good spread in terms of expertise and history in various aspects of research. We are a multidisciplinary journal, so it's really important to have that breadth of expertise. If you have a look on our website, this is a short snippet of our scope, our description of the types of papers that we deal with. And I'll come back to this more later on, but you'll see that from the scope description, it's not just about agriculture. It's very much about the interactions between components, or between levels in the agricultural system. That's really that interaction, rather than just being about agriculture, is one of the primary reasons that we find that articles aren't in scope for the journal. So I'll come back to more about that later on. This is our current list of classifications that people have to pick from when they submit to the journal. So as you can see, it covers quite a wide range of topics. And we have editors that can handle all of these. another indication that the importance here is to do with the interactions in the agricultural system rather than agriculture itself. I thought we'd just highlight a couple of special issues that that are either just completed or on the way. So here's 4 of our relatively recently, like last couple of years, completed special issues. So these are issues that have been guest edited by researchers who have compiled or brought together authors with papers on a similar topic. One that I suspect will be quite relevant for you will be the 2 middle ones: agricultural research for rural prosperity and agricultural systems perspectives of global food security. They're two of our quite good special issues. We've also we've got 4 that are on the way at the moment. One that will, in fact, I've just accepted the final editorial earlier today. It's on the science of scaling, so that I think that will be quite relevant to you all. It's about how to best move from research and development to actual uptake of improved agricultural methods. The next 2 special issues are well on the way. We have several papers published or about to be, and these arose from a conference that was held last year in Uruguay called Farming Systems Design. And the final one, the one that we've launched only a few weeks ago, is on the impacts of COVID-19 control measures on the agriculture and food systems around the world. That's going to be an interesting one for us. It's quite different. It's very descriptive about what different countries around the world are experiencing as their populations have been shut down or isolated or being horribly affected by COVID-19. And you should see papers from that coming out in around about 2 or 3 months. So a little bit more about the journal, published by Elsevier, which is one of the larger publishers. We have a mixed mode of publishing, so subscription, which means that you can submit a paper without paying for it to be published, or open source, where you pay a fee and it's available to anybody with or without a subscription. And we find around about 25% of our articles are open source. We publish about 180 articles a year, and remember that I said a little bit earlier that we receive around about 1,400 submissions. So you see that the vast majority of the submissions do not make it through to publication. Our impact factor is currently 4.2 and our site score is 7.3. Which puts it in a reasonably good impact category. This graph here shows the bars where we've got where our site score has been tracked over several years, and particularly over the last 3 years, we've been working hard on improving the quality of the papers in the journal so that they've the importance and significance and impact of them are more obvious to readers, and that's showing up in the number of them that are being cited. The other thing that we keep an eye on is the journal ranking compared to other journals in the same topic, and that's what the blue line is. So at the moment, it's I think 8th or 9th in the category, and that's the type of level that we would like to see. It means that people are recognising that the papers that we're publishing are quality and have impact and relevance. So where do they come from? Well, India is one of our top submitters. In the period from 2018 to the end of last month, there have been 367 papers submitted, with India as being the primary geographic location. So that will generally mean it's the location of the corresponding author. As you can see, there's quite a very large number of submissions from China, India, Brazil, more than I expected. So it was quite good for me to see these statistics as well, quite a few from the United States, and then quite a long tail from a large number of other countries. So that's what was submitted, but what was actually accepted? So here's a graph recolored. Now what I've got are, I don't know if you can see my mouse. It's the only pointer I've really got, but what I've done is I've colored the bars according to the percentage of submissions that were accepted. So there's 2 countries that over half of the papers that were submitted were accepted. One of them is the Netherlands, but most of them, our acceptance rate is less than 10%, and you'll see that that includes India. And this is something that we'd really like to address. It's not so much a publication target, it's trying to get papers in scope and with the qualities that we're looking for. And hopefully this type of seminar will help with improving that. This is a figure showing what's happened to all of those manuscripts over that period from 2018 to the end of last month. There were over 3,000 manuscripts submitted. We ended up declining around about 80% of them. Over 300 were accepted, and there's about another 250 or so that are in review or revision. And history would suggest that we'd probably end up accepting around about half of those. Now, here's one of the main topics of this talk, is that the vast majority of those 80% that are declined are desk rejects. So, and desk rejects means that they didn't go into review, and essentially it's been in some respects a bit of wasted effort on the part of the authors, in that there's quite a lot of work that goes into getting a manuscript into the submission system. So it'd be really good if a greater proportion of those were manuscripts that were in scope that we could consider for publication. So desk rejections, our primary reasons for these are, first of all, they're not in scope, and I will explain these more in the next few slides. The apparent significance or relevance of the article is too low, or it's not apparent. It might be there but buried in the article. There's obvious flaws in the methodology, or there's insufficient quality of writing or language in the paper. It's really important that you get past desk rejection, because around about 40% of the manuscripts that go into review will eventually get accepted for publication. So looking at some of these issues, scope. This is the biggest single reason that we desk reject articles. This is the same text that you saw earlier, but with describing the scope of the journal. And by the way, there's a much longer description on the journal website, with some of the highlighting that we've got on the website. And this is trying to draw attention particularly to this aspect here. The journal is not about agriculture. It's about the interactions within agricultural systems. And if the article is more about a component or a field trial on a crop yield or something else like that, it's probably not dealing with the systems or the interactions in the way that we see as being in scope for the journal. So trying to to either bring your article into scope with the so that it's dealing with interactions is one of the best things that you can do if your aim is to get into review in our journal, or it may be just for the type of work you're doing that agricultural systems isn't quite the right journal for your style of work. All journals have their home area, the area that they're very comfortable in, and this is where agricultural systems is. On our website, we've got a much more elaborated description of the scope. One of the things that should help you decide whether your article's in scope before you put it to the journal is we've got quite a long list of exclusions that mean that if these are the primary rationales or focuses of your article, then the odds are that it won't be in scope. That doesn't mean to say that you can't have elements of this in the article. So, for example, you can use typologies in your work, but if the end point of your article is just describing a typology and its development, then we won't find it to be in scope, and it would be returned to you. However, if you go on and use that typology to do something more that explores interactions or some interesting system changes, then it is quite likely to be in scope. And I've got an example of something like that further on in the talk. Significance is the second aspect that we consider. So significance is novelty as well as relevance. It's the type of thing where the work that you have done is important to somebody else. It's the primary reason that we don't accept studies that are purely descriptive. Because descriptive studies rarely go into what the implications are beyond the immediate point. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later on as well. The other 2 points are obvious flaws, and to be fair, we don't get many of those. In the internal processes and research and development organisations usually means that really bad flaws in the research design is caught before it ever hits the journal. Of course, there will be times where the reviewers find nuanced flaws or that they don't like or that are inappropriate. But here we're talking about the big things like lack of replication or soil carbon studies that last only a few years and things like that. The final one is the quality of writing or language. And this isn't really as big a deal as you might think. If everything else is looking good, but the quality of the writing's bad, we'll return it to you for revisions, and we'll ask that you get additional editing done on it and invite a resubmission. So it's a desk reject, but it's not a final reject. When the writing is of an intermediate quality, we will make a decision about whether we ask for improvement before we put it out to review. If it's just, wrong prepositions and things like that, then we'd probably put it through review and then ask for English improvement further on in the review process. But if the language is bad enough that we think that it's going to give us difficulty attracting good reviews, or whether it's just going to annoy the reviewers, then we'll ask you to improve it before we put it into review. So this section's hopefully going to be quite useful for you. This is how I would think about dealing with a desk reject. Now you'll see that I'm not dealing with obvious flaws here, because I assume that you've already got it under control. So to make sure that you don't get one of our desk rejects, the things I would think about are, in order, the significance and the scope, and then the quality. There's a reason for this. significance. This is one of the harder things to do, because what you're really being asked to do is, for the most part, your paper has been written out of the piece of work that you've been funded to do. It's got a particular purpose, usually quite often very narrow or quite focused. And then if you want to publish a paper on it, all of a sudden you've got to take a big step back and say, well, what does this actually mean to someone else? Somebody that didn't fund the work, wasn't involved in it, and isn't in the same area, doesn't live or work in the same area that the study was undertaken. So it's quite a big leap to be able to do that and do it well. And that is the easiest time to do it is to do it well before you start writing. It's very hard to turn a piece of work which is quite focused on describing what you did and what the implications are for the people in the study area, and then trying to bring it up and make it broader so that you consider what it might be, what the importance or relevance might be to other people. So my recommendation would be that you consider what the relevance or significance is before you even start thinking what your paper might look like. And it doesn't matter whether you're submitting this to Agricultural Systems or any other journal. This will help you no matter where you end up. It will end up with a better quality paper that's less likely to be desk rejected. Once you've got your story, your significance or relevance, then the next thing is to think about scope. Now, you can have some difficulties here because for the most part, your research or project will come from something that's been funded. So in some respects, the scope's already been decided. But you can nuance a paper into scope, or you start thinking about which journal you ought to be putting it in, because it might not be Agricultural Systems. The way I usually do this is I have, if I'm writing a paper and I think I know already what the significance is, then I will probably have 3 or 4 journals that I think this might end up in. And as we work through the structure and the content of the paper, it becomes pretty clear which journal it's likely to end up in. And once I've got to an advanced outline stage, I've probably targeted a particular journal. But I will have read the scope or understood the scope of several journals before I do that. Finally, the final point on my list of 3 that you should consider is to do with the quality of writing and language. It's in some respect the easiest thing to fix. I'm not necessarily saying it's easy, but if everything else is right, this one can be dealt with. You've got colleagues and co-authors to help, but also professional editing services. And as I said earlier on, it's not if the paper is good otherwise, this tends not to be a deal breaker. One of the things that will really help a lot of people, I think, when they're writing a paper with respect to the quality of the writing, is to make sure that when you're developing the outline for your paper, that you understand what your main message is, what your story is for this particular paper. Once you've done that, what information do you need to support it? And then keep everything targeted on story, supporting the general message or finding that you want to convey. There's also a few tips on writing that I've included there. I particularly like the essay that was recently published in Limnology and Oceanographic Letters. It's open access, so everybody can get at it, and it's some really simple but very useful tips on how to write simply and clearly for science. One of the things I thought might be useful here was to give you an example of a manuscript that could have ended up quite badly out of scope, but has actually turned out to be a really good paper. So this is a snippet from a sentence about what they did. So first of all, it's a survey. And if you remember back to the exclusions, we said that we don't publish descriptive surveys. But that's what that was the first thing that they said they did. But they did more. The next thing they did was they parameterized a model that helped quantify, crucially here, the benefits and trade-offs. And this is bringing in the interaction side of things. So this is what's helping put it in scope for this journal. Had they just done the survey, it would not have been in scope. But adding something on that starts to analyze interactions does bring it in scope. And then they went a little bit further. They very clearly described to the editors what was new, different, and relevant about their study. If you want to have a look at that paper, it's called To Mulch or Munch, Big Modelling of Big Data, and it was published about 3 years ago in Agricultural Systems. So coming back to, so that was getting a paper into scope. Now looking about how to get the significance or relevance part right. I believe this really is the hardest part. It's very hard to take a step back from your own work and figure out what it might mean for other people, what others might value from your work. I can't give you some concrete examples or guidelines or anything like that here. I can only give you recommendations of things you might want to do before you start scoping up your paper. Have a look at what's being published in the journals that you aspire to publish in. Don't just read about what their results were, but try and figure out what was the difference between the bit of funded research they did and the focus of this paper, or their paper. It might not be immediately obvious, but you can usually see it when you read through the introduction and then into maybe the final sentence in the introduction where they talk about the objective, or in the materials and methods where they're talking about the work that they actually did. And in a good piece of work, you will normally see that although they were doing a field trial or a modelling study or something else like that on a particular thing, the perspective from which they explained it was quite higher and wider, and that's what makes it relevant for other people. So it's hard to do that, but it's really worthwhile doing it. And the other hint there is talk to other people about it, get their perspectives, and see if your opinion about the relevance of your work for others is reflected by other people. Now we're moving on to a few nuts and bolts. Too many authors, and I might be included here, think that the abstract is just something you've got to do after you've done the real work of writing the paper. It's not. It's actually really important for a couple of reasons. First of all, most of the papers that we desk project, we don't read past the abstract. So if the abstract isn't a good reflection of the paper that you have submitted, we might read a bad abstract and rejected a good paper. I suspect it's not that common, but it is a possibility. So my recommendation is spend quite a bit of time on your abstract. The abstract should consist of 6 sections. They're not formal sections, at least not yet. Background, why are you doing the work? What was the problem? What your specific objective is? What methods you used? What your results are? what your conclusions are against your objective, and then what the significance of this work is to other people. And the symmetry is, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but the results relate to the methods, the conclusions relate to the objective, and the significance relates to the background. And with that, you can tell quite a complex story in, I think our word count for an abstract is 400 words. It takes work, but you can write a really good, simple, clear to understand abstract from a complex study if you follow that sort of recipe. Other hints are avoid acronyms, lists of values, equations, citations, anything that adds a lot of detail, minute detail or complexity into it. It's not the information that people really need. If you think about it this way, whether a particular treatment was significantly different from another at 5% level or the 10% level, if that's important, there simply is not enough detail in the abstract for people to act on that information. They would have to read the whole paper. So why bother cluttering up your abstract with information that they can't use? Give them the big messages, the reasons to read the rest of the paper. A few other sort of random points. The title's somewhat important. Spend a bit of time on it and make the significance of the work to other people obvious in your title. And I suppose it should go without saying, but follow the instructions to the authors. But having said that, there are quite a few authors that don't. The one one thing that we find happening more and more is that people are not putting the figures in with the text. You should only not have them in the text if it's the formatting just gets too bad. But crucially, always have the the captions with the figure of the table. One of the things we really want to do is to make sure that we give the reviewers the easiest job possible, so that they can concentrate on the content of the manuscript and return a good, insightful review. And if they're having to hunt from the text to a figure and then the captions are somewhere else, that's not likely to put them in the best of moods when it comes to reviewing the paper. Other things, the cover letter. It's really helpful if in the cover letter you lay it out really clearly for us why you think the work ought to be at least put into review. Explain why it's significant and why it's in scope. Simply saying, oh, we read the guide for authors and we think it's in scope is really not what we're looking for here. If you can do yourself a favour by laying it out fairly clearly and demonstrating that you understand what our scope statement is about those interactions and things, so that if we're in doubt, we read and we've read the abstract and we move on to the cover letter, we go, yes, okay, great, this is in scope, and I'll probably put it into review. The final and the other points is it's quite important to get some good proofreading done. It's really hard to proofread your own work, particularly after you've been through a lot of revisions. And the odd word misspelled or wrong doesn't really matter that much. But if there are too many errors, it puts off reviewers as well as editors. Last few slides are about what happens after your manuscript's been through review and you're asked to revise it. You'll get one of two decisions here. It's a major revision means that it will definitely be reviewed again. It will go back usually to the same reviewers as the first time round. The reason I put mostly there is that some major revisions are really major. And if you've had a paper in that category, you might read something along the lines of, I will assess it before it goes back into review. What that means is that the paper was on a borderline between major revision and a reject after review. And we will read your reply to the reviewers and how you've modified the manuscript before we decide whether to send it back to the reviewers. So you will find that sometimes after you resubmit a major revision that it is declined immediately. And hopefully during that review process, you've got enough information to go on and improve the quality of the work so that it can get to an acceptable state. Excuse me. The other decision term that we use is minor revision. And for those, if you've got a minor revision, you can pretty much guarantee that this paper is eventually going to be published. It's not, could well go back to the reviewers again, but it's very unlikely at that point, unless something previously non-obvious is revealed, that it would get rejected at this point. When you're applying to the review comments, there are a couple of points that I've got some suggestions on. One of the things that we find is that authors read the review comments very literally, precisely, and in a very limited sense, and they don't stop to think, well, why did the reviewer think that, or what made them come to that conclusion, and then addressing the likely reason for that. It's really important to understand that motivation of the reviewer. Well, most of the time, there can be really simple review comments that are perfectly obvious. But really do try and consider what led them to come to the conclusion or the comment that they did. You will come across comments that are points of valid scientific disagreement. And there it's, you have to decide whether you're going to agree with the reviewers or not. My recommendation is you don't have to agree with all the comments, but do pick your battles. If the editor sees that you're disagreeing with most of the comments, then the odds are that it won't go back to the reviewers and be returned to you. We expect quite a high quality out of our reviewers as well as our authors, and they don't usually pick scientific disagreements where there really is none. So consider them carefully. And I've just got a message that I'm no longer presenting. Is that right?
Sorry, madam, there was an interruption. You need to represent.
Okay, just a sec.
Okay.
Is it back now?
Yes.
Yes. So I think I talked about where you agree or disagree with a review comment. One of the most common reasons that I send revisions back to the authors and ask them to redo their revision, is not necessarily reject, is where they reply to the reviewer, but they forget to modify the manuscript. The main point here is the reviewer doesn't make comments out of curiosity or just by the way. It means that they've found something that they don't understand or don't agree with, or that they think is missing. So you don't do a long paragraph or something else like that explaining to the reviewer what you meant. What you do that paragraph, but then you have at the end of it, this has been addressed by the changes to the text at lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So follow up with I've got that message again. Is it? Can you see it again?
Yes. Yes.
So make sure that you follow up and you're modifying the manuscript itself. Of course, look for issues that are wider patterns. Reviewers will often highlight the first 2 or 3 of a pattern and expect the authors to follow through and correct the rest of the manuscript. And the final, I think it's the final tip, unless I've got something on the next slide, is make it easy on the reviewers to see what you've done in the manuscript. So when you're constructing the document that's your reply, give their comment, your reply, and then reference line numbers in the manuscript where you've addressed that particular comment, and either use highlight on the manuscript or submit your manuscript and tracked changes so that they can really quickly go from their comments to your reply, your response. And yes, that was the final part of the main presentation. I think I'd like to just conclude with well, thank you for your interest, but to just an acknowledgement that the journal is not Elsevier and it's not the editors. It's the authors and the reviewers that are willing to submit their work and commit to improving the quality of the published work. So thank you. Would you like me to move immediately into the questions, or do you want to pause here?
Yeah, actually, there are a few questions in the chat box, and maybe like I will just give you a few so that you can answer. Then maybe if some time permits, like we can ask 1 or 2 participants to directly talk to you. Maybe please ask only the relevant questions, because in agricultural systems website it's already there, whatever information, and Dr. Snow has already presented much in detail about the what editorial policy. Maybe I request our participants to restrict. Before that, I will ask only few questions, because there are some questions in the chat box which are focusing on is there anything criteria related to the sample size which is considered during the editorial process?
Yes, so that was one of the questions that came through yesterday. So maybe should I just run through the questions that you gave me beforehand first?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes. It's handy if I can see you, and I can't do that if I'm presenting. Is this big enough to see what's going on? Can you see? Is it still presenting?
No, we can see you.
Yeah, we can see it's visible. Yeah.
Okay, good. What I've done in all of these slides is I've given the written question that I had, and then I've given a few points on my reply. Now, some of these I'll go through really quickly because I've covered them in the presentation already. So the first question was about attracting the attention to the author of the editor. So the first thing that I do when I get a whole bunch of submissions is I look at the title and the abstract and I say, is it in scope? If it's not, it's often immediately obvious it's not in scope, in which case it's a desk reject. Otherwise, but if it's unclear or unclear if it's in scope, then I'll open up the full manuscript and read it a bit more, and I will see if it's meeting that significance requirement. So that's that relevance to other people.
Okay. Yeah.
So why do we reject so many papers? Well, essentially because there's so many submissions. We couldn't possibly deal with 1,400 published papers a year. The number of reviews would be enormous, and we simply couldn't cope. Most of them are just not quite in scope. We expect that we attract lots of papers because we've got a good impact factor, but I think the title makes the journal sound more general than it really is. So I've already talked about the reasons for DEST reject, so I won't waste time on that one again. There was a question about why it takes so long to publish in Elsevier. Now, sometimes we are a bit slow, I will admit that, but sometimes we get completely overloaded with the number of submissions. There seems to be some seasons for submitting paper before Christmas and before the Northern Hemisphere summer holidays. So what we aim to do is to have a short time to the first decision. So that's either DEST reject or into review. And we try and do that within 7 or 10 days. After that, we're at the mercy of the reviewers, and we do try and get it through review as quickly as possible, but it can take a long time. Next question was about whether we publish review articles. So yes, we do. We highly recommend that you talk to us before you start constructing your review. We can give you some tips to help you to help make it more likely to be accepted by the journal or put into review, which might be to do with the scope or the slant. Or we might suggest that you're better off with another journal. Here's the question about sample size. There's no rules. It's the only rule is that it should be appropriate for the topic. But the other point that would like to make is that we very rarely publish work that's based on surveys alone. And you'll see from that example that I showed earlier in the presentation that there are ways to have a survey as a core of your work, but you're presenting something that's much more than the survey. You don't have to use sophisticated statistical models or anything else like that. That's not the criteria. The criteria is it the right technique for the question or the problem at hand. And that's what the reviewers will be looking for, not whether it's the latest, most whizzy technique. Why can't we review faster? I wish I knew the answer. The main thing is, well, we already invite a lot of reviewers. Like I said, I think my personal record might be 30 before I got 2 reviews back. And the main thing that you all can do to help speed things up are to, when you get review invitations, to either accept or decline them as soon as you can, because that means we can move on to finding other reviewers. The other thing is to submit papers with good titles and abstracts. Reviewers make a accept or decline an invitation based on the title and abstract only. That's all they get to see before they make a decision. So writing good, clear abstracts is really important here. There was a question about whether we paid an honorarium, and no, we don't. We don't pay reviewers either. Sorry about that, but that's the way it goes. There was a question about whether what happens when you get disagreement between reviewers, and it happens quite frequently, but there's not often direct conflict, and usually if the editors notice that, then they will generally give guidance. If you think that there's direct conflict and the editor hasn't commented, then feel free to go back to the editor and ask for guidance if they have a preference for one pathway or over another. You'll usually get a pretty good steer if you do something like that. There was a question about publication charges. It's your choice. Well, mostly, it's generally your choice about whether you pay for open access. And I will say that the open access fees are horribly steep in agricultural systems. They're set by Elsevier and completely beyond my control. Or you can go into the subscription model, in which case the publication is free. Your funding body may have particular requirements for this, however. Yes, this was quite a good question. So this is about whether open access or the assumption, I think, that open access articles are more highly cited or valued, and that it can be difficult to find the fees for open access charges. And again, I acknowledge that they're very high. So I went and had a look at the top cited articles, and I reckon that they would have been just as popular if they had been subscription model. They were all the right topic, well written, good titles, good abstracts, and on topics that were quite popular at the time. So I actually don't see that open access fees are your issue with getting highly cited articles. It's more the article itself. Having said that, I would like to see the open access charges come down, but I've got no control on that. I think this is the final of the questions. There was advice for young authors. So what I think is probably the hardest thing to do is to figure out that relevance and significance thing. That's the viewing your work from other people's perspectives. So my recommendation is to spend a lot of time on that. Consider critically other work in the area and what they have done to make it relevant to other people. And the final things are to remember: a desk rejection is almost always not a reflection of the quality of the work. It's simply a mismatch between the aims that you had as an author and the aims of the journal. Most of the desk rejections are not on quality criteria. So try and if you get a desk rejection, have a good look at the scope of the journal you submitted it to, and then figure out where you went in scope, and either figure out how to put it in scope or find the journal that's a better match for what you've done. Right. Sorry, there was one more question. It was improving writing skills. So we've talked quite a lot about the figuring out the significance of the work and finding your story. The next hint is keep it really simple, keep it direct, keep the language. Whoops, I've lost presentation again. There we go. Almost coming through. You can get a copy of this presentation later on anyway, so you can fill in the gaps. So good, simple, clear writing. My personal thing is never use the word respectively. It's superfluous. Would you ever list your results in an irrespective order? And anyway, I don't think you should, if it's the abstract, you shouldn't be listing results anyway. They should be in a table. Right, good, clear materials and methods sections. they always feel to me like they should be easy to write, but I never find them easy at all. They're very hard to write a concise and clear methods. Gather lots of opinions and feedback on your article, particularly for people who haven't been directly involved in writing it, and take your time. Good writing really does take time. And that was the last of the written questions. So if you want to ask any of the chat questions, I'm happy to deal with those. I think you're on mute.
Dr. Rashid, can we go for a question or we close it?
I had a look at the questions.
Okay.
Dr. Snow has answered many of those.
Yes.
So there have been few questions on agricultural extension, on publishing papers on agricultural extension in the Agricultural System Journal.
Okay.
I don't know whether Dr. Snow would like to respond to that, but I think I will pick that one before we close the session.
So I am having difficulty hearing you. Can you, is there some way of pointing me at the question in the chat window?
Dr. Rashid, can you repeat it again?
Yes, few people have asked questions on publishing articles on agricultural extension, because there's a lot of people who are from the agricultural extension discipline. Yes. So any guidance, any guidelines?
If the article was about agricultural extension methods, and it wasn't about how to, for example, if it wasn't about how to incorporate the interactions between components of the agricultural system, or between the agricultural system and the social or environment in which it was operating, it probably wouldn't be in scope. So I'm not saying that, so some agricultural extension articles would be in scope, and for example that special issue on the science of scaling, that's about extension. And when we publish a special issue, sometimes the scope of the journal is stretched a little bit just for the special issue, to get a coherent story across all the papers. Now, I would say that at least half, 2/3 of the papers in that science of scaling special issue would have made it into, would have been in scope in the journal, even if it hadn't been part of the special issue. So you can get extension articles into agricultural systems, but you need to make it clear how it's dealing with that interactions question, because that's one of our key things when it comes to our scope decision.
Okay. I think we have to. There are a few questions, but I think we have answered most of it. So I think we are almost 5 minutes after the time. So I think we may have to close the session. I would like to thank Dr. Snow for agreeing to our request and making a very detailed kind of a presentation. I don't think we should have got this by writing to any editor. So I think there's a lot of insights on publishing you have shared with us. And I hope this will help us in improving at least the contributions from this region to the Journal of Agricultural Systems. So I would like to thank you, and I would also like to thank all the participants who have joined this session. We will be sharing you the PowerPoints as well as the recording of the presentation. And I would also like to thank all the organizers, CTCRI, ICAR, CTCRI, Dr. Sheila and Dr. Siddharaman, and from Manage, Dr. Sharavanan. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Thank you for the honour of the invitation. I do hope this has been helpful to the people that have been here, and we would very much like to see more of the papers coming from India being in scope. Agriculture is, like New Zealand, agriculture is really important to your country and your economy, and it would be good to be seeing this reflected in the papers that we're publishing. So I hope it's been helpful, and all the best.
Thank you, Dr. Snow. Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.